We are back on Taking Care of Business on Koerner Radio, News Talk, 1180, 1230, KGEO, 1410, KARI, 1000, KKIM in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and 3 times a week on the Internet across this great nation. Our guest by phone, Patrick O'Donnell, combat historian whose books I highly recommend. So we were talking a little bit about your experience in Iraq. We Were One. That's another great book. So like you said, you barely got out of there alive yourself.
Yeah, exactly 10 years ago to this day, I called it a live day because the day that I left Fallujah was my birthday.
Oh, wow.
10 years ago to this day. And, it was a profound experience. And the thing I guess gave me is perspective on how to write. I mean, somebody said it kind of perfectly. I wrote war because I experienced it firsthand. And, I think that's some of that's what I took away from the experience. I also gained the trust of those Marines because we had an ambush where the Marine right in front of me, his head was split open by a RPK, and I dragged him out of the ambush. He was mortally wounded. But I think that experience transferred over to First SEALs, which I'm very proud of because the book is, in the words of those men too, the men of the Maritime Unit, these original SEALs and what they did in World War II. It's an incredible effort on how they were able to overnight create the tactics and technology that we see today. And today's operations, like the Bin Laden raid, is kind of the culmination of all that in many ways.
Yeah. Patrick, one of the stories in the book and I think Sterling Hayden was there, and I'm in the middle of the book, and I'm really enjoying it. But this one kind of surprised me, is the story of, you called it the mini Pearl Harbor, the story of mustard gas that President Roosevelt had authorized. Could you tell that story?
What I love about First SEALs is that there was things in there that surprised me. And, I think when we look at World War II, sometimes we look at it as an inevitable event where we would win, and we had all this massive amounts of men and material, and we just overwhelmed the Nazis. The second Pearl Harbor is a very interesting little topic, because in 1943, at the port of Bari, in Italy, where this all sort of takes place, the Germans launch a massive air raid, and they strike over 50 ships are sunk in Bari Harbor, Allied ships, by these warplanes. And then there's an untold little aspect of this story, which is the incident was covered up for 50 years or more. One of the ships contained a massive amount of mustard gas, and it was bombed by the Germans, and the mustard gas kind of released into the harbor, and it contaminated a lot of the sailors that were sunk on the ships, and then also Italian civilians. Hundreds of them were perished or were badly injured by this gas, and the government covered it up because they didn't want to reveal the fact that we had chemical weapons. And I think it's just a fascinating incident where Taylor and Hayden provide, they help rescue some of these civilians that are trapped in the water, or the sailors. And it's just an interesting aspect of the book. There's a lot of little vignettes like that with things that you just don't realize they happen in World War II.
Yeah. Now, Patrick, just to explain to our listeners, mustard gas was a chemical weapon, and it was banned by international treaty at that time. But President Roosevelt had made this, authorized this ship full of it, just to be on the safe side for us to have in the Mediterranean. Is that correct?
That's correct. And then the entire incident was covered up because we didn't want to admit the fact that we had chemical weapons there.
Yeah, and the problem with mustard gas is it lands on your, it lands on your clothes. So, you've got these doctors that are helping these poor people, but they're not taking their clothes off. So what happens is, once they're helped and they're released, it still penetrates through the clothes and ends up on their skin anyways.
It's very dangerous and created a lot of debilitating injuries that last years because they didn't know how to properly treat these people.
Well, Patrick, you have written some fascinating books, and I just want to touch on them, a few of them here. First Seals was the book we're talking about today. Then you have Dog Company, Give Me Tomorrow, They Dared to Return. Wow. And then you also did the Brenner Assignment, and, of course, We Were One that we touched on earlier. What do you have in the works now?
I've got a book coming out in the summer on the American Revolution, and it's on Washington's greatest regiment. It's an incredible story. And I think it's a story that's an important one, just like First Seals, but it's about kind of where we came, what we started out as, men of fortune, family, and honor, people that sacrificed their entire fortunes for the cause, guys that marched 5,000 miles barefoot, in many cases without pay, and then fought an American Civil War, as well as the greatest army in the world at the time, the British Army. And I'm very proud of that book, and I'm hoping that it changes things.
Yeah, that's going to be a great book. We're having a conversation with combat historian Patrick O'Donnell. You know, Patrick, I know, and you know I've had this conversation before, you know, you're tending to get away a little bit from World War II books because, you know, you don't have a lot of people left from World War II. They're, you know, unfortunately dying off. But if you're going to do a work on the Revolutionary War like this, you've got Clay that might be able to help you because he was around at that time. So
at the end, I was around at the end. He's trying to get back at me, but he's doing a terrible job. You know, have you ever thought of? Have you looked
Clay,
in?
you did a great job climbing out of your sarcophagus again to do this show.
Very good.
Very good, Pat. Very good.
Have you thought about doing anything in regard to honor flight? Maybe some history on that.
You know, I'm open to all things, really. I think stories find me in one way or another, and so I'm always open and I'm always receptive to stories from the past. And I think in all of the books that I've written, like First Seals or other books, I'm hoping to somehow, you know, make a difference in a small way, or just preserve the history, which is just slipping away. Like First Seals, there's one operative left, Frank Monteleone. Mm. And, you know, we just lost another guy, Gordon Salto, who was a Pro Bowl kicker for the San Francisco 49ers, died 3 weeks ago. So I was hoping, you know, many of the men in First Seals were close friends of mine, and I got to know their stories and their lives and everything else, and I just wanted to sort of preserve it before it slipped away. It's a generation that's slipping away, sadly.
Yeah. We've only got a couple minutes left with you, but I wanted to talk a little bit about something that I thought was pretty fascinating. And a little side note, I had to laugh when I started listening to the book the other day. I was bike riding at Santa Monica, and you were talking about a lot of the the SEALs were doing their training down there in Santa Monica. But I was surprised at the Italians were really at kind of the forefront of the underwater demolition, weren't they? During World War II.
They were. The Italians were, in many ways, the beginning of all of it. And it's incredible how at the beginning of the book, this first chapter is about 6 men that ride human torpedoes. They penetrate the underwater defenses of Alexandria Harbor and personally sink 2 battleships, as well as a tanker and another support ship. It's incredible how 6 men can change the course of the war, and that's exactly what happened. And this is a raid on Alexandria in December 1941, and it creates this underwater arms race, this urgency, because America doesn't even have special operations or SEALs at this time, and this is where men like Jack Taylor and Commander Woolley and others, they come together and they overnight they create it, they make it happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's an incredible story. It really, really is. The gentleman that got me involved in the Marines in the late 60s was a UDT SEAL diver, and I remember he was telling me stories about things they were doing in the water supply in Hanoi years before we were there. And, you know, I always thought he was just exaggerating until the Pentagon Papers came out, and a lot of the stories he talked about were in the Pentagon Papers. So, you know, the UDTs are there, you know, ahead of the troops.
These guys lead the way.
Yeah. Yeah, they're
the First Seals, and looks like Dog Company, where the Rangers, my books have been on sort of special operations troops or special forces, etc., that are the spearhead.
I wanted to let you know, just for information purposes, we have Honor Flight here in Bakersfield, and what they do, they take everyone that goes on Honor Flight, and they have him record his operations in the service in World War II. So you might have a lot of access to information if you ever want to move forward with that.
Yeah, it might be a lot of information for another book for you, Patrick. Again, the book First Seals, I highly recommend it. I recommend any of Patrick's books. I mean, they're fantastic. Dog Company, I think so far up until this book, is my favorite because that Point to Hawk is just an incredible story. Patrick, thank you so much for the time, and please, anytime, we would love to have you back.
Thank you so much for having me on the air.
We'll be back in a moment on Taking Care of Business on Koerner Radio News Talk 1180.